Craig. And Tom, you shared with me the story your first year coaching major junior national team. And you mentioned the covenant because we've all done the covenant. The coaches sitting here today have been through the covenant. And I regard that as a way of creating or initiating buy in to a philosophy of doing things the right way
Mhm.
as a team. Can you share that, Tom?
I'm happy to, Wally. I can tell the group this was it would have been Winnipeg's World Junior Championship in 1998-99. And at the time, I'd been in Vancouver and had been fired. I'd come back to Hockey Canada and was VP of Hockey Operations. And George Burnett was the head coach named at that time, and George took a job with Anaheim. And it's kind of interesting, and I appreciate your patience with this. But I sat in a room with Dave Branch, Gilles Courteau, Bob Nicholson, Murray Costello, and um, I can't recall the other individual, but I was there as VP Hockey Operations to help identify a replacement for George. And we had about 12 or 14 outstanding names up on the board. And and I thought for sure there's a head coach in here. This is not a problem. And as we started to talk through it, Dave said, I have an idea. And okay, what's your idea? He said, Tom, why don't you coach the team? And I thought, oh boy, okay, this is completely unexpected. I was not at all expecting that. The reason I share that with you is that I did take the job. I was VP hockey ops at the same time as getting prepared to coach in Winnipeg. But the whole idea of the story is that I came in here not knowing a player, really, having had nothing to do with the player selection, to be honest with you. And we needed to make sure that we were galvanized as a group as quickly as possible when I got them at the selection camp. And so, with that being said, I did come in with a little bit of leverage because I'd coached under 17, under 18, under 20 prior to 1998, 99. And I'd also coached in the NHL, regardless of what kind of a job I had done. There was some cachet there. But I did not want to rely only on that. I wanted to make sure there was a mechanism in place where we could all share a collective commitment, to what was in front of us, and that was the World Junior Championship, and that we would all take ownership for our own application, to the team goal. And so I don't know how I came up with this, but it was about the covenant. And we played a couple of exhibition games, but our last game was against Russia in Kenora, Ontario. And prior to the game that afternoon at our team meal, we brought out the covenant, and on the covenant it was blank, and on the covenant was just a sort of a square with the Hockey Canada logo in the background and whatnot. And I said, what we're going to do here before we play tonight is identify how we're going to tackle this tournament. And I mentioned to them, you build a tournament just like you build a game. And with that, we need to make sure that with your participation, we identify with those things that are non-negotiable in how we're going to play, what we're going to be responsible for, what our identity is going to be, and what people will say about us when we're done. So we went through about an hour and a half of just chatting about this and writing things out. And then we had it applied to this plastic sort of almost like a tarpaulin. And when they got to the rink that night, it was in their dressing room and it had everything that we talked about on it. And I don't remember I think it maybe was "Wind from Within" was our phrase of expertise, if you will. And then we had everybody sign it, and it was almost like a player contract, and a performance contract of sorts. But because we'd talked that through, and we'd already had a couple of practices, and we'd had one exhibition game already, they knew what we were looking for and how we had to play. They knew that we were looking to build a competition. They knew that we were looking for people that would be able to do, as you've just spoken to, Craig and Wally alluded to, is not necessarily playing your preferred position, but making sure that your performance on the team was geared towards excellence, not so much perfection. It's a spontaneous, impulsive sort of game, but it was geared towards excellence, and we had to share this collective commitment to approaching this together. And that game that we played that night, I think we won 5-4. It was a phenomenal game, way better than the final that we played 2 weeks later against Russia. It was just a tremendous game where we were able to extract a ton of footage of things that we could use to teach how we wanted to improve ourselves, but also identify with things that actually correlated with our covenant. And from that, we had buy-in right away. I didn't have to coach. I coached to the covenant. I coached to what they identified as being absolutely necessities of how to play and perform well and win the World Junior Championship. So I coached to that. Sure, we're talking about exits. Sure, we're talking about tracking. Sure, we're talking about transition in the defensive zone and all those things. But all I had to talk to was we want to play fast. And so that really does incorporate getting pucks in behind the D. It doesn't include turnovers at the blue line. And checking fast. And so all I did was coach to the covenants, and they knew exactly what we were talking about because the covenants were non-negotiable. And I skipped over guys a number of times, because we lacked the attention to detail in some of these areas. That was my level of accountability with a team that were just getting to know me. I, them, the covenant was our insurance policy. And it really, in fact, held us together. It was the glue that allowed us to perform, from within ourselves. We didn't look for anything extraordinary, anything outside of who and what we were, but we certainly established an identity and built our tournament and ended up playing in the final game, losing to the Russians in overtime. When we were a team that was sort of earmarked to maybe, get to the medal round and possibly not. Our defense was our bread and butter, but the covenant was the insurance policy, and there's no doubt in my mind that it served us well. And I would tell you, in one way or another, in some form or another, a covenant is your insurance policy as long as you're giving the players an opportunity to participate in its development, maybe even use their language, whatever helps them understand they have ownership here, and you are the conductor of the orchestra.
Craig, I don't know whether or not you did any work like that in the short term, but I do know Barry Midori, long before you got involved, he was doing the mission statement exercise with the team. And he had to put in a lot of time with the parents and the mission statement exercise and constantly communicate with them about the purpose of what they were doing and their identity and what Hockey Canada, Hockey Alberta wants to develop. And there are some objective things that I call cardinals that would be a violation of everyone's covenant. And Craig, I'm really curious as when you encounter them, how you address them, and how they were, how you were able to deal with them to get the most out of your group. And I'll just throw one cardinal at you. The best of the best stay out on the ice too long on many teams, and it's not addressed by coaches consistently. And that's a violation of a covenant. And did you have any problems initially and eventually get them to accept shift lengths being much more energetic by being shorter?
Yeah, we did. We got into some of that early on. And again, a lot of these kids aren't held to 40 or less second shifts. They're allowed to pretty much do what they want. So we've run into it a couple times. I think what we did before we left, hang on here, Wally, is we did a values session. So we didn't do the covenant full on like you and I talk about we do here. We did a values session where the players came up with 4, 5, 6 values that meant to them, but they had to tell us why and explain exactly why they went. And we started breaking up into small groups and got into two bigger groups, and we came with our list. And in the end, I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but they were things such as family, trust. The big one was dialed, and what dialed meant to the group was easy enough for us as coaches is looking at a kid. You dialed, and that meant, are you ready to go? Have you done your homework? Are you prepared to play? And we could use it mid game. We could use it in between periods. So how we kind of went about that as a staff is, fortunately now everybody has video, so we always have time to do video, so we could utilize that, talk to the kids about some of the things that we're seeing. But we used our values to talk to our covenants. So turnovers, the blue lines, especially offensive zone entries, trying to toe drag through the neutral zone, turning pucks over, was one of our biggest challenges to get because that's what they're used to doing and it, being able to. But you can't really play fast and you can't really get a good forecheck going if you're turning pucks over in those areas. So a lot of that came back to trusting your teammates. So, your teammates are your family. Do you trust them? Would you do this at home if it's your parents? So we were able to use some of those buzzwords that they put on their values for the team to help us get through those situations. It wasn't the full covenant, but we felt going down this path with this group was better. They came up with some great ideas. We asked them how they wanted that to be represented. So they came up with the Alberta province outline with a tree, and then they had all the routes connected to all the hometowns of the kids, and then the birds were in the leaves of the tree. So it was a pretty neat little thing we had up in our dressing room and allowed us to get back to it. It wasn't a saying, it wasn't a buzzword, it was things that they meant to them. And by us referring to it throughout the tournament, it helped us break through to them. This is what you guys picked. Like, we didn't have to talk about systems. We didn't have to talk about forechecks or any of that stuff. We just talked about the values of what the team brought and when they weren't doing it right. That helped us get through some tough spots.
Now, this is something in my role mentoring U13, I'm really enjoying it. I'm finding that the shift lengths, we all get in stat at every level. And I I check the in stat every day of all of our teams. And the U13 teams are very balanced. So been looking at a few of the other teams and they aren't. And some coaches are getting a little more nervous about winning and tend to be giving more people ice time. And as an association, we're sort of there to develop and let all those kids develop. And I think in terms of being accountable to that, we want coaches to be responsible for that. Manage the bench, don't shorten it. And that's sort of my own little line. And it's done me well over a long period of time. So, Craig, Josh Gosling talked to me. This was a shocking thing. An elite player, one of the better players in the team, he had to sit for a shift or two because she couldn't play defensively. And he asked her, and she said to him, well, I don't have to. I've always had the puck. So at our level, we've got those exceptional players that are going to have the puck more often than not. And but they still have to develop the behaviors and the work ethic and the habits that build the team. I think. Am I making sense here, Craig?
Oh no, you're bang on, Wally. That was part of our downfall is we didn't know how to play without the puck. When the puck was on our stick, we made a lot of really cool things happen and created lots of scoring chances and had some nice, D zone exits and great plays. It's when we didn't have the puck, we had difficulty picking up the right people, going to the right areas, anticipating the game of where it's going to go, and just generally playing the game fast without the puck. We were pretty slow without it. We were fast with it. And again, that comes back. It started some work today out with. I jumped on the ice with the U13 Red team today because I haven't been on with them yet, and they were doing some defensive zone work in one end and just some face-off work in another. And just the ability to talk to these kids about why we defend and how to defend, one hand on your stick, why we go do the things we do and use our stick to steer and stick on puck and those things. Those are values that at the 18 level we were struggling with in our D zone, struggling with stick on puck. A lot of times we went into the battle in the corner, two hands on our stick to pin the player, and the pass came by our feet. Like those are just little things that we could develop the habits earlier. And I know all 3 of our coaches at the U13 level are doing a good job at it. Our U15s, we could push that a little bit more. But those playing without the puck is becoming more at the top levels because you're not getting it as much because a lot of our teams, again, our AAA team, we have 2 top teams in the league and the rest are middle of the pack. The CSSHL has 2 top teams. I call them super teams where every player leaves and goes to at some point. Those 2 teams aren't getting better because they don't have to play without the puck. Then they get into these situations and those kids struggle. And they get on to college, and a lot of those kids struggle at the NCAA Division I level or at the U Sport level because they haven't had to play the game without the puck. Like that's an area we can push a little bit more. To touch on your shift length piece, Wally, I do the same as you. Every Monday, I go through all the games on the weekend. I'm looking for shift differences, shift time on ice. If there is some big differences, there's conversations with coaches as to why. Lots of times there's an injury or it turns into this kid in the power play, not the penalty kill this week, and we had 6 power plays and no penalty kills. I know there's some of those situations that do go on at some of the higher levels. But the interesting thing for me, Wally, is our shift length in general for most of our teams is too long. We're getting out changed. So when I pull up a U18 AA and our kids are getting 17 to 19 shifts in a game, they're getting 22 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. The other teams are getting 24 and 25 shifts on average. So as an association, we are getting out changed. Our shifts are longer, and we have kids playing on the ice for a minute plus on most of our teams right now and not 45 seconds or less. So it's pretty interesting to dig into that side of it too.
The idea of shift length, I've got 2 stories. Jordan, I'm going to ask you to share your story when you brought out the volleyball flip charts, trying to reinforce that when you coach the U18 AA team. But the story that shocked me the most was, I believe it was Sochi Olympics, and Mike Babcock coached. The shift lengths were 30 seconds. And Crosby had some 20-second shifts. And that was probably one of the most dominating team play efforts by our team. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but hockey's not an aerobic game. It's a burst, sprint, coast, adjust your pace game. And if you play longer than 40 seconds, you're going to be tired. You're going to disrupt the chemistry of the other lines. And you're not addressing a cardinal of respecting the team and the ice time that the lines need to play together. And the teams need to learn all situations. Now, there is a point, Craig, and you and I sort of butt heads on it. There's a point that you would shorten the bench to win. And myself, I'm more or less the opposite. I just roll the dice and hope it happens. But I found that when I didn't head coach and I let the defenseman coach change the D and the forwards change the D, I just let them do what they wanted, and I looked to see if those star players were going out too soon. Were they heaving? And if they were heaving, I called them back and I explained to the coach looking after that they're too tired to play at their best. Even though playing tired, they can still probably be as good as most players. So, Jordan, you probably accomplished what you did was an exercise on the bench that I thought it was amazing. But can you share that story of the flip charts and the shift lengths and how it worked for you?
Sure, Wally. Yeah, much like Craig had mentioned, you have players that are at the top end of the skill level, and in many times they get the opportunity just to do whatever the heck they want. And so in coaching U18 AA, I had lots of kids coming out of U15 that didn't understand what a shift length was, what an appropriate shift length was. And so we tried different things, including the old let's skate for 40 seconds and see how you feel after it in practice and some of those, and it still wasn't sinking in. So it was just more by good luck than good management. I was thinking about, well, how can we show it visually for the kids on the bench? And I happened to be going through our phys ed storage room at my school, and the volleyball flip chart for flipping the score for when you're playing half court was there, and I grabbed it and took it to the rink, and we stuck it on the bench and did the math of, well, you should have 30 shifts a period. And so every line that went out on the forward side, they would flip one half of it, trying to get to 30, and the D pairings would flip on the other end, and we'd see how close we could get to 30. And it was pretty amazing that after a while, they were really thinking about it. And there was actually a couple of games where, especially second period long change, where we didn't play very well. And all I had to do was send that chart back into the dressing room with them. I'd give it to the last kid going into the room and say, hey, take that in. And so that's sitting in the middle of the floor in the dressing room. And when they're seeing that there's only 20 shifts there, they can start to figure out, well, what's going on? Why are we playing so much slower than the other team? Well, as Craig was saying, we're getting outchanged. And so that was a visual that we used, and I haven't had to use it this year, but it was one that I'd used different times, and it actually worked because allowed the kids to see you're in it together as a team, and you're not taking ice from your teammates, and when everybody's taking appropriate shift lengths, we're competing a lot better. So it was one of those things that just worked as a visual reminder. The other one was with the Instat piece and taking the calculations of the shifts of players, and you take the names off of them and just giving them a chart with the shifts, the total time minus, and having them do the math, figuring out what each of the 20 players on the team, what their average shift length was. And then at the end of it, giving them the strip of paper of which kid they were, and them having them to figure it out. And some of them were a little surprised, and especially early on when you do that, and you have some discrepancies early on of some taking longer shifts than others, and understanding that how important it is that we're fresh on the ice. And Craig's used the line before that we change when it's appropriate for the team, not when it's appropriate for you. And I know I'm paraphrasing you a little bit, Craig, but not quite right. But it's the gist of it is the players start to understand that, and we actually practice changing. Now it's something that we do, practicing putting pucks deep and one forechecking and the rest changing, and changing the forechecker immediately when it can. So it's that piece of taking advantage of the change.
Wally,
Yes.
just to Jordan and Craig's comments here, I think like change is a part of life, and I think that and you're right. This was the World Cup in 2017 in Toronto, and I did a talk with OK Tire owners and operators in New Orleans, and OK Tire is a Canadian company, and there were 600 of them there, and my talk was going to be on change. And I actually, well, you can appreciate where I would use the hockey platform to talk about change. Hockey is one of the few games that changes on the fly, that's perpetual. A lot of other sports stop, make their change, adjust their plays or whatever. Hockey is one of the few that changes on the fly. I started my presentation with the number 39 on my drop-down screen. And I said, and I just, I asked people, what do you think this is? And nobody had any idea. And I said, this is the average shift length of Sidney Crosby in the final game against Team Europe in the World Cup in Toronto, 39 seconds. And I said, what was most important here was number one, Sidney's status, and number two, his commitment to the team and doing everything he could to give us the best chance to win. And then I said, I started to recognize, that this could be part of my discussion. And so I had World Junior footage from that year. And if you remember, this was in Ostrava, Czech Republic, and Canada won the gold medal, beat the USSR, the Russians in the final, who had beaten Canada, our team, 6-0 earlier in the competition. And so I talked to the coach. He wanted to spend some time. We talked about, practicing the change plays, Jordan, as we do in practice, out changing your opponent. Why we can win. If we win the change game, we can win the game. And the reason we wanted to talk about this is because the Russians, as most opponents do when they hand somebody their lunch and meet them again, have a certain level of confidence, take a little bit for granted, are maybe giving themselves too much credit for being highly skilled, highly talented, et cetera, et cetera. And what we did notice is the Russians took long shifts. And we made it very clear that through the change play, that we would be able to beat the Russians if we changed, within that 35, 40-second mark, pushed the pace. They didn't respect us. They thought their skill was superior. They thought they were a superior team in every way, shape, or form. We built a tournament with the help of Mark Hunter and Dale, putting our team together and putting the right people on the ice. But most important of all was the fact that we had practiced the change play. We recognized pace, pushing the pace through, changing. And I showed the last clip of my presentation was when we scored the go-ahead goal against Russia. It was a change play. Puck went deep, one forechecker, Jordan. Two forwards went off, changed 1D. We pushed the puck back to one of the D in the neutral zone, RD in the neutral zone, so we could complete the change. And then we worked our change play. Bang, bang, breakaway, scored. And the Russians, you could see all 5 of them outside the blue line of their end. They were dead tired. They couldn't catch us. And so I equated that to business. I equated that to, you've got to be prepared to change. You've got to be able to stay ahead of the curve. You've got to be able to push the pace and be a leader. And you've got to be able to sacrifice something in order to make sure that to stay in a position, in the pole position, whether it's in business or hockey, you've got to be prepared to change. And the beauty of hockey is that changing on the fly is incumbent with winning hockey. And out-changing your opponent is incumbent with winning hockey. And if you took someone's number and you put it on a board and you said, this is 39 seconds. This is the average shift length of Sidney Crosby in the final game. If you can find someone, and even if you think back to it, sorry to dominate, if you remember the goal that Mitch Marner set up in Toronto where he lost his stick, came flying by the bench, the trainer handed him the stick. Mitch Marner went in, made a great pass, scored the goal. The bench, the trainer on the bench was aware. He was part of, that play. He was a part of being alert and ready and prepared to participate in whatever needed to be done in that moment in time. And that's all part of, the impulse and the spontaneity of the game. The strategy behind change plays, the strategy behind being ready on the bench, all of those things, to me, equate to winning hockey. And the fact of the matter is, I really like what Craig and Jordan have shared with us. McKinley, you as well. I just think that, we're as good as we want to be as long as we recognize selfless hockey. Recognize that if we don't know what we're good at, we'll never know what we're good for. But we have to stress being good at playing without the puck. And being able to chronicle that and being able to manage that and being able to applaud that with your great players. With those that come in with sort of a mindset of I'm a go-to person, I'm offensive. Really at the end of the day, Canada started really winning World Cups with National Hockey League players and World Junior players when the very best players were on the ice, but sacrificed themselves to play with the character required to play without the puck. And that started in 2002 with the National Hockey League and the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City.
Thanks very much, Tom. I